In the air to left, well hit. Back is Craig. What a team. What a ride. The Cardinals are world champs in 2011.
Welcome to Crafting the Call. This week, we are looking back on one of my all-time favorite World Series, 2011. That was Game 7, but we're not really going to look back on Game 7. We're going to look back on Game 6. I'm Josh Sushan from the Albuquerque Isotopes.
And I'm Jesse Goldberg-Strasser with the Lansing Lugnuts. 13 years later, the Texas Rangers finally got that very first championship. Boy, Josh, they were right on the cusp in 2011, and it's great to relive how they didn't win the championship.
Man, I'm telling you, I just love the entire 2011 postseason so much, and then that World Series. I had so many different rooting interests that were involved with it. I wanted Ron Washington so badly to get a World Series title as manager, but just the thrills, the chills. I'm telling you, I did not want Game 6 to ever end. And there was a while there, Jesse, that I wondered if Game 6 would ever end.
This was the joy for me of simply being a baseball fan during this fall classic and during the postseason. The teams that I love, they're not in. And I can sit back and go, boy, I'm loving watching this Rangers team. And I'm loving watching this Cardinals team. Let's see who gets it. And then you've got a seesaw World Series going back and forth. And then the Rangers win. In Game 4, Game 5, they've taken a 3-2 lead going back to St. Louis.
And now we get to relive Game 6, Jesse, as broadcasters, as working broadcasters who can study all the different voices. We're going to hear a lot of different voices who are on the call for Game 6 of that World Series. And it's going to be fascinating, Jesse, to break down who's your audience, what words do you use, how are you setting things up, and then how do you deliver in these iconic moments?
Josh, by a lot. Are we talking 4 different broadcasts?
More than 4.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And we're also going to test how well you learned another language when you were in school, Jesse.
I did study it for 7 years, and I'm still doing it on Duolingo, and I'm not very good yet.
Okay, so let's start with the Texas Rangers radio broadcast. And we're going to hear 3 times in which the Rangers are 1 out away from the World Series. And this is how it sounded.
The set. The pitch is on the way. Swing and a miss on a fastball down and away. And the Cardinals are down to their final strike as the count is 1-2 on David Freese. 7-5 Texas, 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th. Feliz has the sign. Here's the set. The 1-2 pitch. Swung on, high fly ball to right. Going back is Nelson Cruz. He's on the track at the wall. He can't get it. It's beyond his reach. 1 run is home. 2 runs are home. The game is tied at 7. Over to third goes Freese, and he is safe with a triple.
Unbelievable. At some point in time, I guess it figured it was going to come back and bite Neffy, and that walk to Berkman certainly did.
Andrews toward the middle at short. Kinsler on the outfield grass at second. Moreland a step and a dive off the line at deep first. Beltre off the line about 25 feet at third. 2 balls, 2 strikes, 2 outs, 2 on. Here's the set by Feldman, and the pitch swung on in a little bloop. Center field, it's a base hit. Rounding third is Jay. He will score, and the game is tied again. It's the Cardinals 9 and the Rangers 9.
Feldman tried to come back with that cutter and actually made a pretty good pitch. You have to give Berkman some credit. He was able to get enough of the bat on the ball to loop it into center field. And boy, the Cardinals just keep on coming back, and the Rangers can't find any way, at least tonight, to shut the door on it.
It's the 5th time the Cardinals have come from behind to tie the game, and the 3rd blown save for the Ranger bullpen. 3 balls, 2 strikes, payoff pitch, swung on, high fly ball to center field. Hamilton going back. He's on the track. He's at the wall. It is gone, and the Cardinals have won it. A walk-off home run by David Freese. Cardinals 10, Rangers 9. There will be a 7th game tomorrow night.
Go ahead, Jesse.
So I thought that these were very neutral calls by Eric Nadel all the way through. You had Steve Busby, who was giving the bigger picture. But, I mean, Josh, to go back to the first 2, if that ball is caught by Nelson Cruz, the Rangers are the world champions. If Lance Berkman's little blooper is caught, the Rangers are the world champions. So there's this feeling of he's just swung through a fastball down and away. Eric has to be readying himself to call the championship right there. And I think that he stays very grounded throughout. What did you think?
I think that World Series happened 13 years ago, and I got chills watching the David Freese triple. And I'm thinking about being in the moment and how often broadcasters get asked about, did you prepare the final out, the final words, and thinking about that. And I think about as the ball goes off the bat, it's not clear how far the ball has gone, right? You don't know. And so you're thinking, I'm anticipating the final out. First World Series, Texas Rangers all time. Now there's a fly ball to right. Nelson Cruz is going back for it. He might make this catch. He might make a spectacular catch that will go down as one of the greatest catches ever to clinch a World Series. Nope. It's off the wall. It's way off the wall. It was a triple. And anytime the ball bounces that far off the wall, Jesse, you and I did an episode about inside the park home run and how quickly your brain has to process. Now the crowd is going electric at this moment. Again, I'm getting chills 13 years later. The word that comes to my mind is just professional. This is just the ultimate in professionalism to be able to call this calmly, professionally, objectively, without sounding like you're super sad, but also not sounding like an over-the-top homer for the other team.
With both of these flies, the triple and the homer, there was a critique that I just heard given to a partner where he was told, make sure that the listener knows how deep the fly ball is. With each of them, fly ball to right, and then we started tracking it. Nelson Cruz backing up right near in the wall. Same thing, fly ball to center field off the bat of David Freese. And so there's no sense in either one of them deep drive center field, or there's some sort of element of trouble with them, except one gets down and one gets out. And I do wonder, should that be an element that's added in? Something of the foreboding nature, the idea of this is major trouble.
I think that when it comes to a call like this, when there's close to 50,000 people who are going bananas, right? There's also an element of you almost have to raise your voice a certain level just to be heard. And again, This goes back to audio engineering, right? And how good your engineer is. It's like I'm on a turntable here. And so I think that describing the outfield, that's kind of like fundamental broadcaster 101, right? Like this is what Josh Hamilton is doing. He's going back, right? Once the outfielder gives up on it, then you can start to get into more of a home run call. But there's not an enormous amount of doubt, but there's just enough doubt. And again, I think that all three calls are just the essence of what it means to be in the moment, to capture it. And even if your heart is sinking because the game is over and your team is lost, I think it's just really, really just fundamentally sound, fabulous broadcasting.
It reminds me a little bit of Ken Coleman in 1986 with the Red Sox, where he's just calling the action. He's just calling it straight. Here's the score. Here's the pitch. Here's the defense. Here's the play. I do think that a different broadcaster, and this is not generally my philosophy because I do follow that, call it straight. What are the necessities? Get that out there. I think that there are other ways to describe it or other ways to go with it. And I mean, we've listened to a number of broadcasters. Bill King, with regard to Kirk Gibson beating Eck in 1988, and then him looking ahead to Game 2. This is going to immediately send you into Game 7. Are you going to think about what that means? Or are you going to do, which is what Eric did, there's going to be a Game 7.
And I think that when you mention the words Game 7 will become very interesting as we listen to all the different versions and how you let people know that there is going to be a Game 7. And I think that becomes just a personal broadcaster philosophy. Am I just going to be all in on this moment and what just happened and just kind of like, go crazy, everyone kind of thing? Or is it going to be more like the crowd is going crazy, but we still have a Game 7? And that'll be interesting to compare and contrast here.
Yeah, I'm thinking of alternate ways that it could have been called, right? Nelson Cruz, can he get it? No, it's down and it bounces by him and the Cardinals tie the game. This guy scores, this guy scores. But as you say, it's so professional and it's so straight. And this could have been the neutral national broadcast.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to the national broadcast because the call for Joe Buck has kind of taken on a life of its own. And it's because of the way that it harkened back to a call from his father. So we're going to begin by going back to 1991, Game 6, Minnesota Twins.
Into deep left center from Mitchell. And we'll see you tomorrow night.
There's the word deep and a deep left center. But this is classic baseball broadcasting, and this is what made it so major because he didn't say much, but he said enough, right? You understand everything. The pictures are telling the story. Jack Buck classic. And Joe, I mean, this is his legacy.
How many World Series Game 6s have ended with a home run? This, by the way, is the 63rd Game 6 in World Series history out of a total of 107 World Series.
I remember one, working it with your dad in 91. Kirby Puckett, Jack's famous call. We'll see you tomorrow night.
There's one inside, 2-0.
Nothing else. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Freese hits it in the air to center. We will see you tomorrow night.
Okay, so in case people didn't notice, when the graphic gets put up and Tim McCarver mentions, I remember your father's call, that was actually in the 3rd inning, okay? So that was not a setup just a couple of pitches before. That was in the 3rd inning, and then we get to the 11th inning. But that's Jack Buck. I want to go back to Jack Buck's call for a moment because we heard him with Eckersley versus Gibson in 1988, and he was on radio. I don't believe what I just saw. How did he do it? Like, he just kept going on and on and on. And now we hear him 3 years later on television, and it's a completely different style that Jack uses. He says the words, "We'll see you tomorrow night," and that's it. We don't hear anything else from him for a while.
I'm going to criticize Joe Buck here. This is my chief criticism with Joe is when he's great, he is loving what he's seeing. And you and I could turn on a Joe Buck game within 3-4 seconds. We could say to ourselves, oh, Joe is enjoying this game. Joe's not really enjoying this game. The words are there. And boy, I would have loved if he had punched them, if there had been like a little more heart to it. But there's Jack Buck's image because it's the home of the Cardinals. It's the team that Jack was the voice of and that Joe grew up listening to and then calling himself. There's just isn't that same spirit behind the words, though the words are the same was my takeaway.
I'm not positive about this, but I'm pretty sure that this is when Joe Buck was going through voice problems, right? And he needed to really, it's almost like he had a couple of bullets in his voice and he was trying to save them. And this was kind of the peak of Joe Buck saying very few words in between pitches. And a part of that was his style. And part of that was also, I'm going to let McCarver shine. And then part of that was, I have to save my voice. So I think that if Joe would have had this call maybe nowadays that his voice is completely recovered, I think we hear him a lot more in football. Yeah, punch it a whole lot more that he does now that his voice is back to 100%. But I also think that, in that moment, the seed had been planted in the third inning with the graphic and with McCarver. Maybe it's something they discussed in a production meeting. My other takeaway is that this is what it means for a broadcast team to come together. This is where producer, director, graphics, replays, all of those people coming together and say, we've got these elements, we're going to foreshadow these things, and we're going to be ready for anything so that you guys on the air can shine.
Really is perfect. If you are removed from it and you don't understand, and then someone introduces it to you and says, here are two incredibly memorable moments in baseball history. These are two of the greatest home runs in baseball history, World Series history. Let me show you Kirby Puckett's. Now let me show you David Freese. And let me give you the context leading up to that. And here's the game and here's everything else. And oh, by the way, the two broadcasters are father and son. That lands.
Yeah, it really does land. And, look, let's be honest. Joe Buck definitely has a lot of critics. I've always thought that he's a really good broadcaster. I think that these are the moments when people think, oh, he's a homer for the Cardinals. Look, it's not his fault that the Cardinals are in the World Series and that his dad's picture is on the outfield wall.
Look, that's my pushback. I'm going to be a little bit more of a homer. Yeah. If I'm watching, I'm going to thought any broadcaster there, if there is a game going on, let's say I'm watching Mike Tirico calling a football game, regular season game, and somebody scores a ridiculous touchdown, he's going to be punching it and going nuts. And this is the World Series, and this is a walk-off home run. And I just wanted a little bit more. But as you said, with the vocal troubles, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We will see you, like, whatever it is Joe's chance to put his own spin on it. But the words being the same does work for me.
I think if anything, Joe was so self-conscious of being perceived as a Cardinals homer that he didn't completely punch it as much. And the great comparison goes back to Vin Scully with Kirk Gibson. This was the Dodgers broadcaster who was working the national call as the Dodgers win in this iconic moment. And Scully, if you didn't know that he wasn't the Dodger, you wouldn't know that he was the Dodgers announcer throughout the regular season because he's just Vin. And for Joe Buck, he's not the Cardinals broadcaster throughout the regular season. He's not doing 130 to 160 games, right? He is the national broadcaster, but he's from St. Louis. And because his last name is Buck and because his dad was there for so long, there's the perception that he was this Cardinals homer. And I'm sure that Joe grew up wanting the Cardinals to win and probably very happy when the Cardinals win, but that doesn't mean that you can't do the job either. And the more that you say this, I wish you would have punched it a little bit more myself.
On the other hand, we've listened to Eric Nadel. We've listened to Joe Buck. Who else you got for me?
Yeah, we've got a bunch more. All right, let's get into a whole bunch more in a row, and then we will discuss afterwards.
Freese leading it off. Crowd in a frenzy. 3-2, a swing and a high fly ball. Center field. It is gone!
Delivery on its way. Swing and a high drive to center field. Get up, baby. Get up, baby. Get up. Oh, yeah. David Freese has just sent us into game number 7. This series is tied 3-3 with a walk-off home run here in the bottom of the 11th inning. The Cardinals win it 10-9. Unbelievable. Phenomenal. Just fantastic. What a night. What an evening of baseball. This one will go down in history as an all-time. Unbelievable.
David Freese at the plate against Mark Lowe. 1 run would do it here for the Cardinals. Otherwise, we're going into a 12th inning. 9-9 the score. What a game. Here comes the pitch. And Freese hits it high. He hits it long. He hits it into centre field. Is it long enough? Oh, it is! Oh, I don't believe it. We're going to game 7. And you'd think the Cardinals had won the World Series given the reaction from the crowd. Twice the Texas Rangers had the chance to shut the door and win the biggest prize in baseball. Twice they could not hold a 2-run lead. And now David Freese with the biggest home run of his career, the National League Championship Series MVP, has come up with a fantastic home run into centre field. It's 10-9 Cardinals. We're going to game 7.
Lanzamiento le tira, está elevando David Freese al central, cuidado, puede ser el final, la bola se va, se acabó el juego, ganaron los Cardenales y tienen un mañana. La Serie Mundial se extiende al 7º juego. Cardenales han regresado heroicamente en la 9ª, en la 10ª y en la 11ª para ganar. 10 carreras por 9, home run de David Freese, 2 veces, él lo empató en la 9ª, él lo ganó en la 11ª este juego y nos vamos al 7º juego de la Serie Mundial. Pizarra final, 10-9, San Luis tiene un destino, los Cardenales están vivos y tienen mañana.
I know the word mañana.
I can help you out with a lot of it. I love the cuidado. Like, careful as the ball approaches the wall. Se va. Do you want to start with Dan Shulman?
Yes, let's
go with all of these.
Yes, let's go chronological. Okay, so the first one we heard was Dan Shulman on ESPN Radio. And I want to start with this, Jesse. Dan Shulman said, "It is gone." Vin Scully in 1988 said, "She is gone." Give me your broadcaster breakdown of it versus she is gone.
It's the poetic. It's a ship, a she, right? It's based upon how many centuries of literature and what do we personify, what do we anthropomorphize, like all those different things. What gets which descriptor? So I side with Dan, but where Vin is coming from is the literary tradition.
I also think that it depends on your style and who you are. I think it would be weird to hear Vin Scully say it is gone. And maybe that's because I've heard him say she is gone so often, not just on the Kirk Gibson homer. That was not his home run call. He used it occasionally. I also think it would be weird for Dan Shulman, big, booming voice of Dan Shulman, to say she is gone, right? And I think that's where, as broadcasters, we learn from the greats. We break down these moments and we think about what we would say and how we're going to say it. It ultimately comes down to who you are.
Well, Vin was the poet in the booth. Dan Shulman is the broadcaster in the booth, the announcer with the amazing pipes. And so that does color how you're going to describe this. I would be shocked if Dan Shulman, in the midst of a bid call, made an allusion to a famous poem or started to quote Dickens. But Vin Scully quoting Dickens would not have surprised us in a baseball game.
Overall, I think that Shulman's call is awesome. Again, I got goosebumps, right? That I feel like it's the goosebump meter as I listen back to this, right? And hearing Rangers radio with David Freese's triple, I get goosebumps. And I'll be honest, I didn't get goosebumps with Joe Buck's home run call, but I just kind of smirked because I know that's an homage to Dad, right? And we all have our relationships with our dad and what that means to us. But I hear Dan Shulman, okay, and this is a 100-mile-an-hour fastball out of his mouth, right? To go back to that episode.
Yes.
Right? This is Dan Shulman not saving anything. Let's go with this call.
Okay, you took my question for you because I was about to ask you to bring out the radar gun and give me what is the reading here. He gives it his all because this is a moment that demands his all. And then Dan, like Joe, comes from the school of letting it breathe, where you deliver it and then you sit back. And that's Dan on the radio sitting back because we're going to get to the calls where it's not the school of letting it breathe. But after Dan, it's Mike Shannon on Cardinals radio. And the word that I wrote down, besides that the audio is crackly, understandably, I thought that Mike was reserved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought the same thing. So he immediately sends us to game 7, right? He's saying, get up, he says that it's home run. I forget the exact words. And then he immediately sends us to game 7. Yeah, I actually thought that he was quite reserved too. I was surprised that his focus was game 7. And then it was, this is fantastic. This is wonderful. This is, about what a game it was as the celebration continues. Yeah, again, maybe some of it is because you can't hear Mike Shannon as much, but I think he's kind of reserved. It's almost like a 91 mile an hour fastball here from Shannon.
It's the difference between broadcasting and talking. And I felt like as he went on with it, it was his private thoughts. Unbelievable was delivered like I might say, wow, that was unbelievable. It was just remarking on this unbelievable moment, not for the fans, not sending it out, just him sitting, musing into his microphone about this moment.
I want to quickly go back to a little bit about Shulman versus Shannon. And I'm thinking about, I've never called a World Series, but when I call a big walk-off moment, right? And I want to punch it, right? I kind of come from the Dan Shulman school. Like, I want to punch it. And then when I pause, number one, it's to catch my breath. Number two, I want to be able to mark something either in my scorebook. I want to see if I look at the time. There's just like other things that I kind of want to see. Take a glance of the field. I want to get just a big picture of the celebration that's happening. What's the crowd happening? And that's the way to let my voice settle, catch myself, catch my breath, and then come back with something. And in the case of Shannon, it's just hamster wheel. Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go.
Yeah, I think I'd be trying to figure out the words to sum everything up.
Mm-hmm.
Freeze this moment. I'd probably come up with something corny.
Yes.
The 2-run triple in the 9th, the walk-off home. There's so many different things that you can do with it. Okay, so that's Shulman.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, big and just beautiful. Chef's kiss. And then Mike Shannon. Number 3 is Simon Brotherton on BBC. And there was something awesome that he did that I thought was really fun. But the first thing that occurred to me in listening to him is he's just going to talk his way right through it.
What was the thing that he did that you really enjoyed?
The Cardinals fans are celebrating like they've won the World Series. I loved it because we are so used to an announcer saying the crowd goes wild. Great, fine. We understand what that means. They go bonkers. They go bananas. Everything that we can say to just say that the crowd is making a ton of noise with their exhilaration. I loved him putting it in that feel. They have won game 6. The feeling here is as if they have won game 7.
I actually want to go back and listen to it again because there's a couple of different things that he said, and I couldn't write them down fast enough. And so I want to actually go back and listen to it one more time because there's also just something about the British voice. It just sounds so regal. It just sounds so proper, but yet there is delirium that is happening in his voice, and yet he stays in the moment, even though he may not. It just sounds like he's in the moment. So I want to listen to it again. Keep talking.
Okay. Because he talks a little bit too much at the start, and then he talks his way into discovering what he wants to say. There is no philosophy of we are going to pause to let it breathe, and now I'm going to think. And I actually would have loved to introduce this to him because I think based on the way that his mind was going, and as he was observing all of this, I think he was going to get to where we have seen our greatest broadcasters get to, which is summing up the overall moment. What a scene this is, what a moment this is.
David Freese at the plate against Mark Lowe. 1 run would do it here for the Cardinals. Otherwise, we're going into a 12th inning. 9-all the score. What a game. Here comes the pitch. And Freese hits it high. He hits it long. He hits it into centre field. Is it long enough? Oh, it is. Oh, I don't believe it. We're going to game 7.
Is it long enough? It is. I don't believe it. We're going to game 7, right? He sets it high. He hits it deep into center field. Is it deep enough? Like all of that building of what's happening, I think is fantastic, Jesse.
Well, that's what I was missing with the Eric Nadel call is where's this ball? Where are we right now? I also think that Simon breaks a cardinal rule. You ask any baseball broadcaster, there's a fly ball. What's the first thing you say? Where is it?
Yeah.
Is it the left? Is it left center, center field, right field? He hits it high, hits it long. It hits it into center field. It's the third way that he describes it. but I'm willing to cut him some slack because it's beautiful that he gets there and then, keep it going.
Yeah. All right. Let me play again.
And you'd think the Cardinals had won the World Series given the reaction from the crowd. Twice the Texas Rangers had the chance to shut the door and win the biggest prize in baseball. Twice they could not hold a 2-run lead. And now David Freese with the biggest home run of his career. The National League Championship Series MVP has come up with a fantastic home run into center field. It's 10-9 Cardinals. We're going to game 7.
Okay, pause it real quick. This is why I think this call is that close to excellent. He hits on all the big points.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if he just says it's gone, it gives me one Mississippi. Is it deep enough? It is giving me that one Mississippi of the crowd breaking out like they have won game 7 of the World Series to allow that moment to set in. Because, Josh, we hit on the Rangers blew 2 chances at the biggest prize in the sport, the way that he puts that. The fact that David Freese was the NLCS MVP. So we have framed the Rangers' failures. We have framed the man who's the hero. This is what I've been looking for, is the greater story of all of this going on.
I really enjoyed the phrase, the biggest prize. It's not a phrase that we hear very often. We just hear World Series title. We hear champions, the biggest prize. He hits on David Freese was the National League Championship Series most valuable player. It's a lot of words to get out, right? You can sometimes shorten that. But yeah, he's hitting on what a postseason for David Freese.
So this is almost Vin Scully-esque. Vin would have waited a bit. He would have let all of this happen. And then maybe 45 seconds to 90 seconds later, he would have come in with something like exactly this about David Freese and what he has meant and what he has been and what this means. And the Rangers, this is all of the headlines being written. And I do think that this gets at what can make broadcasting great and what can elevate the moment itself.
I also think that we talked about the word joy. There is just such joy in Simon's voice. He is just so joyful about what he has just witnessed, the words that he is going to use. It is just such, again, there's just such joy. It's like what his voice conveys to me isn't baseball wonderful without having to say, isn't baseball wonderful?
I completely agree. This brings us to Ernesto Jerez, who's delivering the Spanish language call. And so I do understand what he's saying. And it's the Simon Brotherton style of, we're going to talk all the way through, and I'm going to give you everything here in this moment. I'm going to give you the ball is gone. I'm going to give you the final score. I'm going to give you that we're going to game 7. Every single detail like that. This has been my experience. I don't know about your experience. When a Spanish language home run call is posted or a Spanish language baseball call is posted, there are tons and tons of English speaking baseball fans who do not understand the call, who immediately say, this is a better call than all of these American broadcasters. Same thing with the Japanese language style baseball call, a baseball highlight in Japanese. They will immediately say, this is better than all the American broadcasters. And I think that the element that you just got to with Simon is something that a lot of these fans want. And it is that pure love of this, that pure joy that this is something that has occurred.
It's very much the style of Spanish broadcasters for all sport, right? I think about soccer and I think about these World Cup calls of goals, right? And how just dramatic and passionate they are, with goal, and like how long can you hold the word goal? Sometimes to the point where I just think that it's over the top, like it's 1-0, we're 10 minutes in, But yeah, I mean, again, we also need to keep emphasizing radio versus TV, right? And so we are watching all of these calls because the radio has been synced up to the television. And in fact, when you mentioned Simon didn't say center field until it was third, I didn't realize that because I'm watching it, because I see it. In reality, this is BBC radio, so the audience could not see that. but that's a side point. Yeah. I don't know what Ernesto said other than se va and mañana, but I liked it.
Serie Mundial is the World Series.
Okay. All right. I want to listen to one more because anytime there is a big call in the postseason, I just want someone to inject Gary Thorne into my veins. And so let's get some Gary Thorne injected into our veins.
I got my radar gun ready.
Freese in the air to center. Has he done it? Way back. Hello, game 7. Goodbye. Home run. An unbelievable win for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Okay, so he goes Joe Buck cheat to start, and then actually doesn't use it, right? Freeze, but then there's no verb after that. The has he done it, and then goodbye, hello, game 7. The Gary Thorne voice is just magnificent, but that is such a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure, even though we've heard this many, many times now, I wanted to hear Gary Thorne because of the voice. But this is actually, I think, an example, Jesse, of where the voice matches the words.
Yes.
And what you just said, has he done it? I like the quick question, the quick pause. Yes, he has. Yeah, and then the layout. I mean, this was ESPN International is why Gary Thorne was on the call. So you had Dan Shulman on ESPN Radio, and this was Gary Thorne on ESPN International.
I want to see and hear for the game's biggest moments and the game's biggest games, the best broadcasters and the best calls. And I think we just got some really good calls for one of the greatest moments in baseball history.
So one of the things I like to do when we get close to the end of an episode, Jesse, is just, okay, what are our takeaways? What did we learn? What did we learn today about all these different calls? We heard the final out of game 7. We heard the Rangers, 1 out from victory in the 9th inning, in the 10th inning, and then the walk-off home run from David Freese from Rangers Radio. We heard Jack Buck with the home run call. We'll see you tomorrow night. We heard Joe Buck repeating his father's phrase. We heard Dan Shulman. We heard Mike Shannon. We heard Simon Brotherton. We heard Ernesto Jerez, and we heard Gary Thorne. What are your takeaways?
My chief takeaway is how you started this. What did this game and what did watching this moment mean to you as a fan?
Chills.
Okay.
I got chills watching this 13 years later.
So that's what I come back to is the broadcasters who gave you chills and the joy and thrill of Simon Brotherton and Ernesto Jerez, what Gary Thorne and Dan Shulman can do at that moment, the professionalism of Eric Nadel, Joe Buck hearkening back to his dad. These are a lot of different styles, but I come back to Simon's joy. I come back to that isn't baseball grand feeling.
That's why I love these episodes so much, because we get to hear all these different versions, right? And these are the different things that's fun for you and I to talk about and think about, what would that be like one day? And then, for other people who are listening to this to think about how they can do it with their calls, or even just to give you an appreciation as a viewer of all the different ways that announcers could say this, how they could do it, and kind of what you like a little bit, what you really like. And I think my biggest takeaway is punch it, right? Like, I don't know how many times I've nearly punched the computer screen, but you get to game 6 walk-off. This just might be the greatest baseball game ever played, right? The Cardinals were down to their last strike in the 9th inning, down by 2, and they tied it. They were down to their last out in the 10th inning, and they tied it. They won it on a walk-off in the 11th. They still had to come back to play game 7, and they won it. I think this just might be the greatest baseball game that's ever played. And so at some point, you realize that probably in the 10th inning, definitely by the 11th inning. So whatever you've got in the tank, empty the tank.
What you're saying is don't give an effort like Nelson Cruz.
Right. Oh my goodness. This was so much fun though. I love just hearing all the different versions, what it means, the styles, your audience, and all of the different ways that we can just appreciate just an iconic game in baseball history.
you know, something that I enjoy after a great game happens, there is this feel of a rush to, was this the greatest game ever? Is this the greatest basketball game ever? Is this the greatest shot ever? I love that 13 years later, this holds up.
I love just sitting around and asking people, like, what did you do afterwards, right? You don't go to bed after this, right?
No.
You don't, no matter who you are, you don't go to bed after this. You don't be like, all right, that was a good game. Game 7, so I'm going to bed. Like, what do you do afterwards? Who did you call? Who did you text? How long did the text messaging chains continue? Did we have text messaging chains in 2011? I know that we had text messaging, but I don't know if we had text messaging chains the way that we do nowadays. But again, like, what did you post on social media? What are the different highlights that you watched? Did you stay out at the bar for another hour? Did you go out to a bar? Like, what are all the different things that you did? How long did the adrenaline stay in your body as a fan, as a player, and as a broadcaster?
Oh, beautiful. Josh, thank you. This was a joy to hear all of these different calls. David Freese, Game 6, 2011 World Series.
For Jesse Goldberg-Strassler of the Lansing Lugnuts, I'm Josh Sushon for the Albuquerque Isotopes. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I know we did. We'll talk to you again next week.